Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who was last seen on a highway just outside of Lubbock, Texas.
Tim Longo.
You're driving out there in the dust, in the desert, those dark desert highways. You've got the cool wind in your hair.
Yep, I'm shooting out of the windows and leaving skid marks behind me as I screech to a halt. Yeah, it's
that's good. That's good. I'm glad to see you out there living your best 70s life. We are starting a new series this week on Interstate 76, which is kind of a weird title. Like, I've seen people in the Discord being like, I've never even heard of this game, which
really?
Yeah, which I can sort of understand.
I mean, if you're a lot of youngsters.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're a little younger than Tim, you might not have kind of caught it at the time that it came out. I mean, I remember it purely on, like, I never played it, but I remember at the time it purely on style and vibes of like, wow, there's not a lot like this out there. And then I never got around to playing it. They did make a sequel later called Interstate 82 as well, so I think they did try to keep going with it. But I think there's it stands out, and we'll talk a lot about why. What was you didn't play this game back in the day either, did you?
I think I played a tiny bit, yeah, but then didn't stick with it. But yeah. I mean, we'll talk about it later, but the reason we're playing, one of the reasons I think, in my opinion, that we should play this game or are playing it is, we played TIE Fighter and we talked about the sim game genre, especially in the 90s. And a logical approach might be to play MechWarrior. But we didn't take that.
We're not logical
approach.
People.
Well, I mean, I guess it would be almost obvious. I think in this is going to have a lot more interesting conversations coming from it because it is in that space, but it is a very unique take on it, and of course car combat also. I don't think we played one. Probably won't play many of those either. So it's like a combination of the two.
Yeah, it does. It does kind of scratch both itches. I mean, I am historically not like a mech kind of game player. I find them too. I think I played just a little bit of MechWarrior. Might have. I don't even quote me. It might have been MechWarrior 2, to be honest. When we were starting up Starfighter, because it was kind of in that sort of simmy space that we were thinking about. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, there's way too many buttons to remember what they all do. It's one of those things where, it's, can you remember the 13 things you need to do in a row to properly start your mech? And I'm not that kind of player. Even then I was not that kind of player. When I was more, on the PC, I was already kind of drifting towards more action oriented titles. So it was those kinds of games where like you go, it kind of reminds me of playing like a car combat RPG. There was a particular one that I remember playing in the 80s.
Car combat RPG?
Yeah, like pen and paper.
Oh yeah, Car Wars.
It was Car Wars.
Car Wars, yeah.
And
totally. I will not be surprised if that was an inspiration for this.
Oh yeah, for sure. But like, you spend, my recollection of playing Car Wars was like, you spend like 3 hours building your cars. You're figuring out what your car is going to be, and then you smash them together, and the actual play of the game takes like 5 minutes while you resolve, like, just because I'm gunning it and we're going to play chicken, and then we smash it into each other at 180 miles an hour or whatever. So it was kind of the, it wouldn't have been the sort of thing that I thought, oh yeah, I mean, and mech games feel like that to me, where it's like there's so much time in prep of like, what do I want to put on there, and I want to balance the heat exchange. It's all these sort of semi elements that are the things that kind of, I don't dislike semi elements, but in those, it's like, I don't know. There's just something about it that just, I didn't have a lot of mech stuff growing up either. Like, see on TV, like maybe Voltron or something like that. So I didn't have like it wasn't a wish fulfillment for me either. It was like, I don't want to fight giant mechs. It's not a thing that I've kind of ever thought of, at the time. So it just kind of never connected with me as a kind of genre. And so I think maybe at the time, what turned me off from this one was, this is a very simmy, kind of car combat game.
It absolutely, yeah, I think it absolutely is, and well, and I think we'll talk about it. We will hopefully get one or even two guests on for this, but this this MechWarrior, this team worked on MechWarrior, you know
right,
what I mean, and so it's
like the MechWarrior 2 engine. So
yeah, and I think the other interesting thing about it is like when you do have, because the MechWarrior games were I guess niche, but they also were very popular and beloved in and of themselves. But then having that success, having this engine, and then I think the other interesting conversation about this game is, okay, we have this success, we have this engine, it makes this really well. What is something else we can do with this that isn't a mech?
Right.
And that this is what comes out. It's a bit of a cult classic. For various reasons.
I mean, I've always been. I mean, this is one that I've always kind of thought back on of like, man, why didn't I play that? And now's my opportunity. So let's briefly set it in its time. We're at the point in the years of doing the podcast where it's like, I just want to refer you back to some of our other episodes where we talked about games from this year. If you want to hear us talk,
doing this a while.
Yeah, if you want to talk, hear us talk about the sort of years in depth and like draw connections about what was going on in the industry then. But I'm going to rattle off some of those titles that we played and then some other titles, and we'll kind of take the other part of it as read. You can go back and revisit. So games we played from 1997, according to Tim, who kind of dictated these out to me. So we have Diablo, Resident Evil, The Last Express, Fallout, GoldenEye, and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So obvious connections to Interstate 76. It's like practically the same games. Age of Empires. So other games that came out this year. Age of Empires, and here's a string of LucasArts titles, all that came out in this year. X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, Outlaws, Curse of Monkey Island, Dark Forces 2, and Shadows of the Empire. Which we were remarking in pre-show was kind of a lot of games from LucasArts in 1 year. And then a few others. Wing Commander Prophecy, which was a game I actually played again in sort of preparation for figuring out what Starfighter would be. And Final Fantasy VII, tiny little game, very few people have heard of or played. And another little indie darling called Mario Kart 64. games that really haven't gone anywhere.
Lost to time.
Yeah, it's maybe someday when we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, we'll get to some of those. But yeah.
I want to mention one more that's applicable that I did miss. Gran Turismo.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one for sure. So that was this is PlayStation 1. We're still 3 years out, I guess, from PlayStation 2. I think that was 2000. That's my record. Yeah, it's 2000 because we came out Starfighter in 2001. Yeah, so it's kind of an and of course Castlevania was PlayStation as well. So we're definitely talking like some great PlayStation games at that time. Wing Commander Prophecy I played.
You mentioned GoldenEye, right?
I did mention GoldenEye.
Okay, I missed it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And Outlaws is an interesting one in a way because it is a shooter, but it's also sort of like taking a tried and true genre and doing a stylized,
that's a good
setting and genre approach. Sort of like there's some. It was kind of in the air, I think, right? Like people had these tried and true, like MechWarrior, like Star Wars, like Dark Forces, which we played for the podcast. It's these tried and true successes, and they're like, okay, how do we take this formula but do something different with it? Oh, let's make a Western. Oh, let's make a 70s car combat game.
Sure, yeah.
So it's
obviously,
really, yeah, exactly. So it's a time when those experiments were much more able to be greenlit, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it in prep in prep for the episode of like what are some modern, like I want to kind of stay away from the car part of it, car combat, because there are other car combat games. Although as a as a genre, car combat games feel like they aren't really in the zeitgeist much anymore. I'm sure there are some, and I'm like, but it's very like a niche thing. Which I guess you could argue the PC market in general was a niche thing in 1997. But
Oh
it
wait,
was
Final
growing.
Fantasy Tactics I just found.
Oh, really? Did I
I
miss
missed
that one?
that.
Huh. Okay.
I didn't say that one, so yeah.
Oh, okay. Um,
Sorry.
but anyway, yeah. So I was thinking of like modern games that kind of make me think of the same vibe, which is more the exploitation vibe rather than the car combat. And I think of things like Wet and like Kane and Lynch. And I can't remember
Suda
the name.
51 stuff.
Yeah, and Killer 7 in particular.
Grasshopper.
Yeah, Killer 7 was one I thought of because it actually has a very similar art style, the polygonal characters and stuff like that. I'd love to play Killer 7 sometime with you, but we'd have to like get together and have, because I don't know if it's easy to find copies of that one.
Is that multiplayer?
No, I mean just so that we could,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I have a disc. I still have it.
Yeah.
I love that game, and I played it to death at the time. But it's got a very, that was definitely in my list. And of course the other thing that I think of is exploitation cinema from the 70s. Like that's also clearly a an inspiration for this. It's got the style and vibe. It's got the soundtrack. Boom, wow, wow. Kind of going on in the background. A lot of clicking on the strings. But I was thinking also of things like Death Race 2000, which, although it's in a science fiction context, it is a kind of a car combat movie. Like Russ Meyers. There's like motorcycle exploitation movies at the time, and then of course just general, the various exploitation movies that were kind of big in the 70s in the the kind of grindhouse era that something like Death Proof was throwing back to, right? So it's like the movies that Death Proof was based on are from this era as well.
Once you're, I mean, yeah, for sure. The film genres and the character, stereotypes in those film genres are definitely there. When you're in the game, separate from the when you're driving and playing the game, I also get a Mad Max
Yeah, sure.
feel as well. Like it feels like it could be a Mad Max car game, especially because of the desert and stuff. And so I'm assuming, which was the case for MechWarrior as well, that picking certain locations like deserts is what you do in this era when you're making these games, or space, because you need to render the world right and do it in a way that's convincing but doesn't have a lot of
if you're going to be 3D, right? If you're not going to mix 3D characters with 2D backgrounds like some of the other titles we mentioned on the consoles at the time, or or even just pure 2D like Curse of Monkey Island, or whatever, or something where you can limit the rendering a lot, like GoldenEye, right? I mean, thinking about all the sort of 3D stuff that we mentioned in up top there, it's like it's all stuff where it's either a very limited kind of amount of stuff you can see at once, or the expansiveness is covered by 2D in a lot of cases, or Wing Commander is in space, right? So you are finding ways of like, well, we want to render a world, but we can't afford it. So what can we do with that? And a near distance to render is definitely one of them. Because you can't see very far really, but you get out in the desert and there's like cactuses and stuff that you can, or cacti, I should say, that you can shoot. You can break apart the cacti, which is hilarious.
What a weird. I mean, we'll talk about it more as we both get into the missions, but and then I'm just again looking at this list and it's like, what a weird. We talked about kind of the infamous 1998 next year and kind of all the different games that came out that year that really made a mark on the medium. And then what is it, 2002 or
2004.
2004 is the other one. But I'm looking at this list again. We've played a lot from this list. But even just the fact that Diablo, The Last Express, and Symphony of the Night were all this year.
Yeah.
It's like those are games are all so very different
Yeah. Yeah.
in the same year. Like, what was happening?
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I didn't mention it, but just as an example for like such a wacky year, Mega Man 8 came out this year too for PlayStation 1. So
Oh,
it's like
wow.
even Mega Man was still kicking,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
He was kicking
eh,
Kickman.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Keon would be proud.
Uh,
You mentioned Mega Man.
yeah. Yeah. Congrats, Keon. I'm not going to talk about it again for probably a couple of years. So just so you know. Yeah. Anyway, so that's it. It is like it's got these whole vibes. Oh, one other movie I wanted to mention that I have seen. I mean, it's been ages, but it was Cleopatra Jones, another sort of blaxploitation genre film from this era. They were all like, drugs and crime and powerful men who were abusing people, and corporations and things like that. And then somebody who was, gonna take it all out, right? And in that case, I mentioned it because she drove like a Stingray Corvette, and it had guns in it. It had machine guns
Yeah.
in the car, right? So it's very like on point for this game and for this era. So I'm sure those are things that I hope those are things that they saw. They are really interesting movies, and it's an interesting era of film that I enjoy watching, even though they're problematic on their face. Like, I mean, they know that they're problematic, but it was a way to welcome new voices in cinema in sort of the same way that games were working at the time, which was like, well, it was low cost filmmaking, to basically democratize film, and they were in these theaters that were like, run down, not super well maintained. They might have been nice at one time, like they might have thrown back like to eras of like the 20s or 30s or 40s, heyday of like really big, nice theaters. But they now had an opportunity to put, butts and seats in them for these kind of more focused, playing to their particular audiences kind of films that were on shoestring budgets. So it's an interesting era that they're channeling here of culture. And they're setting it in an alternate US where I guess it's okay to drive around on the highways with lots and lots of guns on your machine, on your car. So
Yeah, they have some justifications of how that all works, and there's a very big to your point on some of the film reference. There's a very big vigilante
right, yeah.
theme going on here. And I was looking up one of my favorite movies of all time, which I've seen probably 100 times. I don't know, Enter the Dragon. Jim Kelly. I was introduced to Jim Kelly there.
That's the one with the yellow and black suit.
Yeah, yeah. They go to the competition on the island.
Right.
And Jim Kelly's one of the fighters, and kind of like the supporting cast hero to Bruce Lee. But Jim Kelly feels like the example for the buddy in this one. But I know he was also in a lot of other exploitation films.
Yeah, I don't think you've ever seen it, but I actually have. Last year when I was at the film festival I go to in the summer, I saw a box of pencils, Blackwings, the kind of fancy artist pencils, and I found a set that is black and yellow, exactly the colors. It's the they do these volumes where they do special ones, and this is the Bruce Lee volume pencils. So I have a dozen of these black and yellow pencils, and I actually quite like them.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. Well, the Bruce Lee, so they had yellow. Yeah, anyway, we're off track, but
off track.
The competition had the yellow, but I think the famous Bruce Lee tracksuit you're talking about is from Game of Death.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the one that Tarantino emulated in
Kill Bill. Got it. Okay. Yeah, I don't remember I could not match the outfit to the film. But
Enter the Dragon's the best one. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Although I also like Fist of Fury. Anyway, we are getting even further and further off track. The other
era,
thing I thought of from the era is something like Starsky and Hutch, which had lots of car chases,
yeah.
and the kind of buddy energy and the banter, which is something we'll talk about as well. So I was just trying to think of all the sort of touch points of why, of course, this is clearly one of the best games ever made, and I can't believe I'm not playing it until nearly 30 years since it came out. So I messed up early. If there was an alternate US me, I hope he played this game back in 1997. At least I hope he had the hardware to play it, because it would have been mind blowing in 1998 when I was starting. I just can't believe I missed it. Let's talk a little bit about the presentation, and because you were talking a little bit about the characters. You want to sort of describe the style and your, also kind of how they're presented as actors and all of that.
Yeah, did you want to hit Activision, or did we
Oh my god, I skipped
because
it's so blank to me. It's literally here right above all the topics, and I skipped right over. Okay, yeah, we should talk about a little bit about Activision, I guess.
We don't, yeah.
That really kind of says everything about it as far as,
It does.
My thinking at the time. But yeah, no, I mean, we were talking in pre-show, and for you, Activision, historic Activision goes back further than this. So you want to talk?
Yeah, I mean, Activision, and I think when we played Adventure, I probably talked a bit about this, but obviously I was an Atari 2600 kid, so I am old. But Activision, other than the core Atari games like Combat or Adventure, some of those, my real loves on that system were the Activision games like River Raid, Pitfall, two of the best games ever. And so when I think of Activision, I always go back to that nostalgic point, and that's obviously where they began. I think Activision, one of the founders was Crane, who was the Pitfall guy, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but then it had, if we were doing, in pre-show we were talking about it, and it's like it's a weird publisher to talk about, because since the Atari era, its identity has been very blah, really hard to coalesce around, and obviously we know where the history goes from the modern perspective. And it attempted to and bought various studios over the years, and ones that we would know and love. Obviously, Call of Duty comes from it. You have Guitar Heroes. There's some of those really big standout successes for them. But when we talk about publishers and companies that were responsible for some of these games, like whatever, Nintendo, on this podcast, usually when we kick one off and we talk about the company that was responsible, there's a fair amount to say. There's for lack of a better term, kind of an identity to it. Like Capcom's another good example. It's like, what are some other ones? Like, I just gave two Japanese companies, but what's a Western one? Blanking.
Well, I mean, Blizzard.
or id, right?
Yeah, id.
Blizzard. So there's
Interplay, and
Interplay, good example, right? Like they knew what they were, and they were doing that thing really well. But then it's like once, and you mentioned Bobby Kotick, kind of like that was a big fork in the road. It's like what is Activision? You could definitely name games that they launched that, like Call of Duty, that changed, I don't know, everything in a lot of ways. Guitar Hero was like another weird example. Yeah, but other than that, it's like they merged with Blizzard, and then Microsoft bought them. It's like, I don't know. It's like, what do you say? Yeah. For me, so that was hard. But what is your perspective on Activision?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I have even less. I mean, the one that goes way back for me, I mean, I think the first time I thought of Activision as a brand was when they bought Infocom's assets, because
that's an interesting one,
right? Because that was when one of the times I was able to get a bunch of Infocom games, because when I was growing up, I didn't get a lot of new games by any means, and of course I did take a break. So for me, when I was actually, I think it was the first year I was in the industry, they had purchased Infocom, and they released either one or two boxed editions of like what they call Lost. It was actually before. It was the year before I joined the industry. So in '97, they released a box set of like Lost Treasures of Infocom, which had like
Mm.
20 or 25 games or something like that. It was all text adventures. They had printed all the booklets as one big booklet. They had a bunch of maps, and then they had a hint book, which I think had the one of the red blue printing with the slide. You can slide down, and so you don't you can't just inadvertently see it. You have to like um, use a filter to see the text that's underneath for the
Oh, right.
answers. So you could like look for a question that would be helpful, and you could like not spoil yourself on the puzzles if you were really stuck. So they had basically hint guides. I think I had that right. And that was a time when I'm like, got a Z machine or something. It was like, I'm going to play all of these, and like some of them I had played. I had played Zork 1, and I think I had played Zork 2. But this is when I played like, The Witness, and or Witness, I think it's called, and the like the Enchanter games. I think there was maybe 3 of those, and it was just like I did a lot of Ballyhoo, like a lot of kind of the weird ones that you're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't even
That
know
was the
about.
cool thing about that set is there was all these weird ones.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like a ton of games, and they're difficult, so it takes you a while. Many of them are difficult. Lurking Horror was in there. Yeah, so that was kind of like my first encounter with Activision. Whereas EA, for me went back, further, and I just kind of like I had a sense of EA as a company before this. But Activision, like, yeah, like you said, I mean, I wasn't an Atari kid. I do remember Pitfall and River Raid. A neighbor had those when I was growing up, but I never had an Atari at home. So I saw them and I played them, a few times, but not frequently. So I didn't really have an attachment even to those, even though I knew they were good games. I would have spent all my time playing those. But sometimes you have to leave people's houses. It's weird.
Yeah.
So I
No,
never really got the
exactly. Yeah.
opportunity.
There, I mean, River Raid was so hard too. Like, I don't think I ever even got to. I don't think you can finish it. I don't know, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's you do need to spend many
some
hours.
people can finish it, but
Yeah.
I've seen the people out there who can finish games like that. We may have already mentioned one. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, but for me, like Activision didn't really. I mean, it was always actually when they had these studios. It was the studios that I would know, like so Treyarch and Neversoft, or things like that. Even Raven,
Toys for Bob.
yeah, Toys for Bob, which was something before it was Toys for Bob, I think. I don't remember what it was called, or maybe there was another studio that they bought and closed or something like that. But it's just kind of like Activision is kind of too big to have an identity, in a way.
Yeah, and they did mergers and acquisitions and all sorts of. They had the whole Vivendi thing, and then we
Yeah,
mentioned
right.
Blizzard, and so it's and I don't know if it was Kodak's influence or what. Probably was. It's like it kind of became just a corporation, and I mean, I think it's just an interesting topic in that companies are brands, and you take a company like Blizzard. I think when that merger happened, we were all like, "What? Like,
Yeah,
why would you?" It's like it was like the most boring vanilla company joining one that had a very pure identity,
yeah,
for better or for worse, right? Definitely challenges at Blizzard, but still, it was like it was a. I guess my point is, Activision is a business. It's
yeah,
not. It's not a game company. It's a
yeah,
business.
yeah, yeah. That's
It's
fair.
a corporation, and
Yeah,
if you look at its wiki, which is all we're doing, that's what you see. You see a wiki about a corporation and a business, not one that you would read about Nintendo, right, or
yeah,
something. And
yeah,
it's just weird that it's so big. And of course, you have something like COD or Guitar Hero or something that makes that much money. And it's like, okay, it's very much a business. It's like you can't stop doing that, as we know. And now COD is like in this never-ending cycle. And incidentally, as we've been talking, I did look at up a couple stats, and um, MechWarrior 2 in the '90s for them was a huge success monetarily and critically. So that was like that cornerstone game. that we chose not to play. We
Yeah.
chose to play Interstate 76, which was based on that engine, and apparently Battlezone was also based on that engine.
Oh, really? I really liked Battlezone, actually.
Yeah.
That Battlezone 1998 title or
98.
whatever
It
it was.
was 98.
Yeah, that's a really fun game as well. I didn't even realize that was Activision. Like, again, like it doesn't
Yeah, it's
connect
from the
to me.
arcade game, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
from the back in the day. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but I
Um,
wouldn't, even back then I wouldn't, like, if I was playing a game in the arcade, I had no idea who made the game. It was like, like, I don't know who made any of those old, like, I mean, I know now, but I didn't at the time even know who made Pac-Man, right? I mean, I'm sure it was on the screens. I just, like, when you're a kid, you don't plug in quarters in, you don't really think about that stuff. Um, and so I didn't. Yeah, and
well, speak for
Activision really did
yourself.
it. Well, yeah, okay. We
I'm
can't all
kidding.
be burgeoning young game designer Tim Ballard.
uh,
Yeah, so it was yeah, it's not a company for, I mean, to that point, for folks who are interested in kind of Activision and what a business like that means when it makes contact with a company like Blizzard. I recommend Jason Schreier's book, The Rise and Fall of Blizzard Entertainment, which is about all of that, and talks a lot about its early days, but then really gets into it with the Activision acquisition and what that meant for the company, and how, like, everything kind of changed. It's all around World of Warcraft time, so it's an interesting book. So, not just for industry types. I thought it was an interesting story of why things happen, and when you kind of get to that scale of success that World of Warcraft was, what that makes happen. So it was interesting and kind of chilling. Like, I don't know. I kind of hope I'm never that successful because I don't. That's not the
Well,
world
we
we want to live
heard,
in.
yeah, we heard again, kind of a little bit, and as you can tell, as developers, we have strong opinions about Activision, especially through our careers, and so this is going to be another one of those comments. But to that point, on the Blizzard merger and such, we had heard, and I'm sure this is in the book. Well, I don't know if it's in the book, but I think it's known that this was the case. That when that merger happened, there was a sort of, I guess I'll say, grace period or something, where Blizzard was kind of
Yeah, let to be Blizzard.
let to be alone, right? Like, okay, we're not going to touch the magic that they have, but eventually that timeline ran out, and we know then a lot of the founders left and a lot of the old school people left at that time, and you can mark the games what happened to them at that time.
Yeah.
Hearthstone's a great example because I was playing Hearthstone pretty readily at that time, or regularly at that time. And the way that monetization changed after that, the way that the game really morphed, and you could see the Activision. At least my perception was that you could see that shift started happening, and that's when a lot of those folks left, and then they ended up making Marvel Snap. So, you know, so it's just interesting to see how big corporations like that can really, if you're not careful.
Yeah, I mean, you look at other big acquisition houses and what happens when they acquire places. I mean, EA is the famous example of, like, they bought I don't know,
Yeah.
Ultima or whatever, and it's like, oh, and then it made one or two games, and then they closed it. Or like, the culture will change, right? When somebody spends that kind of money on you, they I don't know if it's an ego thing, but they want to make their own stamp on your company as well. I think it's a certain point, or they're just not comfortable with the way you do business. They like that you've had success, but now they're like, well, yeah, but now we got skin in that game, so we got to kind of like put our thumb on the scale a little bit and shift the direction of things, and that rarely works out. Like, it only takes a certain amount of time before those places. BioWare's acquisition by EA, I think, is like one of the longest surviving um sort of brands and brand identities within EA, that have lasted. Activision,
Mm.
like, I don't even think of any of their brands, their internal brands, other than Blizzard, of even having a brand identity anymore. I'm not even sure how many are left. A lot of them are just kind of like in the COD churn, so it's like, I guess maybe Treyarch, because they sort of lead one of them,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
with
And Raven
uh,
does too. I think Raven is
Black Ops.
overseeing. Warzone.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
I can't
I'm
have
pretty sure they're the lead on that, but yeah, but they had to shift their focus toward the cash cow. So,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and those are they're good experiences, but it's a very specific thing that
yeah.
Raven definitely in the old days made some really interesting things, including a Jedi Knight game.
Yeah, yeah.
Or
And
two.
maybe someday we'll play something like Heretic, or Hexen or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Because those were pretty good games that I remember enjoying at the time. I don't think I finished either of them, but I do remember playing and enjoying them. They were Quake Engine games.
Yeah, I played them.
Yeah, yeah. No, I remember playing that. I don't think I finished them, but for whatever reason, just moving around to other stuff. Yeah, do you think we've covered it now? Now that I forgot about it and came back to it.
Well,
Okay.
it's forgettable in
Yeah.
a weird way. One of the biggest publishers is forgettable.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think they kind of like it that way, to be honest. And now they're absorbed into an even bigger behemoth. So, and we'll see how that goes. I'm very curious to see how that all goes over the next few years. It's already not been going super well if you're employed. So who knows? But that's enough about that. Let's not go down that road. That was a
segue to Interstate 76.
Yeah, that was a highway segue to Interstate 76. Let's try to go back now to
We're
the character
on a road to nowhere.
Oh, good God! Wow, somebody should send in a singing review for that one, because clearly he's able to carry that tune a little bit. I had been starting before we went into Activision to ask you about the sort of character style and introductions on all of that stuff, and I thought I'd let you kind of present that.
Yeah, sure. You mean as far as the rendering, or just in general
The rendering, and then also like just how they're the sort of opening credits kind of.
Oh yeah, the opening credits are great. Yeah. It's just a really, we talk a lot about this a lot, and I think the other related to the style stuff, the other reason I'm glad we're playing this versus MechWarrior is that MechWarrior is based on the BattleTech stuff, the FASA the FASA stuff,
right?
Pen and paper game and stuff, and miniature games. But we kind of know that everyone knows what that is. It's like they're big mech, drivable mechs, and this is just such an unexpected turn in the road. See how many road references we can get. Yep. And so the opening credits, so the opening credits are a great example. We talked about music, we talked about stylization and genre, that this is playing within. It's in the name, really, right? It's like, and it sets it in its time. The logo's perfect, etc. But the opening credits are great because it shows you the style, but it's like it also shows you the satire of it in a way, because it's fake actors playing the characters. It's like such and such. I didn't write down any of the names, but it's like, but the villain's name was like the actors.
I don't remember the actors. I didn't take any of the actors' names down. Yeah.
But the actor's name is like, last name is Fungi.
Yeah, that's right. Fungi.
So it's like,
and the character name is like Antonio Malocchi or something like that. Or
it's perfect. Like all the names are really perfect for the genre. But
I mean, second, I think Groove Champion as a lead character is maybe second, and a close second, to one of my favorite names of all time in a video game, which is Stiletto Anyway. That remains that is a great name for a character.
What was that in? You remind me?
That's Anachronox. Stiletto Anyway.
That's right. That's right.
The female character. Yeah.
That is a good name. That is a good name.
Such a great name. And then, but Groove Champion, that's a pretty great name.
All the names are good. Yeah. Jade. Yeah. I think they're all good. But I just love that, they have the title sequence, they have the great graphics over them, and then they have the, the snapshots or the quick cuts and the freeze frames. And it's just, you can imagine it in that sort of style. But I love that they have fake actors with, playing the fake characters. And then what's more on the style side of it, of course, we've talked a lot about the 70s elements of it, which you can all imagine, especially because of the genre films that it's based on. But they went a step further, which again, I'm really hoping we can talk to people about this. And as you know, that I love, for any of the listeners, and Brett knows that, and I love a cohesive, experience. And at this time, just talking about the cinematics for a second and the characters, because it's a car combat game, right? So most of the time when you're in the car, you're not going to really see characters. You're hearing them a lot, which we'll talk about the radio eventually, probably next episode. But pretty, it's a really great analogous version of this for sim games, because radios are critical for sim games. But this is perfect because you're in a car. And so the cinematics, when you're going to see the characters, in this era, pre-rendered stuff was happening. So you could do smooth characters. They didn't look, Final Fantasy, same year being an example, they didn't, they were human-ish. And,
Right. Yeah.
you could render a human, for the most part, but they really committed, like the characters are polygonal. They in a way almost match the terrain polygons, like they're simplified but stylized at the same time. And so I really love that choice, because it, one of the big uncanny valley issues that we had, especially with the 90s, is this concept, and Final Fantasy VII is a great example. I know it's blasphemy to say anything bad about that game, but the gameplay, the combat system, and the cinematics, none of those looked like the same thing. They were basically three different styles
and different programs.
Three different programs, right? Three different executables, or whatever. And so in this game, it's like it feels very cohesive, because they chose for the characters to be as polygonal as the cars in a way, but they're still expressive. They don't have facial animation, but the voice acting,
they don't have mouths.
Great. They don't even have mouths, right? But that's a decision.
Yeah,
we talked about
choice,
it.
Honestly.
We talked about it a little bit with Final Fantasy Tactics, the weird no mouth thing.
Yeah, no nose in that case.
Oh, no nose. That's right. It was no nose. So the style of the game is just spot on and so cohesive and so well done. And then the cinematics, like the characters are believable. I don't need smooth foreheads,
Right, exactly. I mean, they are just to give the terminology. They're flat. They're straight up flat shaded polygons, not even garrote shaded or anything like this. So you have basically single color per polygon, so you can see the polygons, right? I mean, there's no and it's like, and they're using as few as they can get away with deliberately for the look. In some cases I'm like, maybe would have made a little different choice on like just the shape of the torso in Group Champions case. It's just like there's something weird about like the 2 points kind of the sides in the middle, but it's a little weird looking.
I think I know what you mean. This shirt, they're trying to make a shirt. But
exactly,
it's
trying to make
really
a shirt,
working.
but it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't quite read.
Yeah,
but the faces are amazing. Like faces are great. I mean, if you study how to draw faces, like or to shade faces, really, like that's what they have you do. Is like, well, think of it as this many planes, right? And then you just kind of smooth in between them, depending on the direction of the lighting, and but it's like, think of the faces like whatever 12 or 15 or 20 planes, and shade appropriately, like reflecting or being more in shadow, as a technique to like simplify so that you can render a reasonable face. And this just has that, and it looks cool. It just looks cool.
Yeah, and then you have the really interesting transition, because it's just so weird that this is a sim, right? It's technically a simulation game. So you have these really stylized, well acted, well written, fun, tongue in cheek, satirical, kind of genre cinematics, and then you go into the missions, and they transition to radio. You have them talking to each other, giving you direction, and then you transition to the driver's seat, basically the cockpit, and you have your dashboard, and you have all your instruments there, and you're now in this new world. They do have one nice connection point in that if you're looking out the side windows, you pull out your pistol to shoot out the window. So I can't wait till I want to there's a reason to do that. I've done it, but I haven't hit anything. But it does render the arm, so you have that connection point where you see his arm as he does in the cinematic. So there's even more. But because they didn't try to make the cinematics so high poly and rendered that way, the connection between being in the car and being in the world and those is much more consistent, which I really love. And then obviously the VO carries over, so it's just always a nice transition where you just hear the voice come over the radio from the cinematic, and then you're just kind of off. And there's just something about car combat games. They're very specific. I don't know. There's just something about driving a car in the desert, looking at the horizon, seeing your target out in front of you in the distance as you're chasing.
Wait a minute, I was with you. There's something like that. Something about just driving in your car, wind in your hair, with your guns. I'm like, what? I was just picturing myself. I was picturing myself crossing whatever, South or North Dakota, whatever it was, when I went west. I remember exactly what you're talking. Oh, wait a minute, guns.
When you go mowing down. Well, I think, and the reason I brought up Mad Max is I am quite a big Mad Max fan, in the films at least, and I think the thing about this game so far, once you're in a mission, is that because it's naturally a sim and because it's naturally a car game and you're driving, it's kind of already naturally cinematic. Is my
right.
You know what I mean? It's like there's a fantasy fulfillment there of just driving over the plains. Yes, I've added in the machine guns, but it's like, I know they don't mean to be emulating Mad Max, but there's so many great scenes in Mad Max where he is driving over these dunes, right? And just like stuff's going down, and even with the new ones with Furiosa. So yeah, anyway, I don't know. It's kind of checking a lot of boxes for me.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a good point. And I think that I feel the same way about, some of the exploitation movies that I've mentioned, because all of the style of those things with their funky soundtracks and, just the attitude of the actors, who are often, in the early exploitation films were like in their first movie, right? So they were like, what they basically had was like a vibe, is that, they weren't actors yet,
right. They had a persona.
What's her name? Pam Grier. Like, you see her first movie and you're like, this is a very good looking young woman who's not acting yet, she's there for some particular, but she has a presence nonetheless. And you're like, I could see it. Like, you could see it, getting there. And I mean, I think that this guy Groove Champion, he's reminiscent of, well, Chuck Norris, for one, I guess, for sure. And then, either Starsky or Hutch. I forget which one's the blonde, but that was another, because of the mustaches and everything kind of, they all kind of fit into that thing. But yeah, it's super, it is super fun. I like I said, I'm kicking my younger self for not playing this at the time.
I do, well, I don't know if we want to talk more about style stuff, but I did have a quick topic shift before we finish this one off.
No, that's cool.
So I did want to mention, though, we were talking about getting the game going, and who knows if anyone listening is going to actually play with us this time, because it is a weird game, and people were like, "What is this? I've never heard of this game. Well, how dare you, youngster?" So the GOG version. So I wanted to bring up this topic because it relates to simulation engines and physics of the time. I'm playing the GOG version. You might be.
I am also. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've played a couple missions in, and because we're playing on modern hardware, what is happening? because it is janky, right? There's some stuff we're going to have to do to make it play the way it was intended to be played, but it is not behaving well.
Right.
It's playable, but it's like the physics when you're going over terrain, it's like very jittery and very like, so is it because the frame rate's too high is what it is?
It is. Yeah. And the reason is that what happens is, when you're, so at the time, God, it's like how to phrase this. So one of the things
Can
that
you
we
teach
didn't.
us a lesson in rendering
Yeah, I mean,
physics?
well, it's the physics, not the rendering, that's the
Yeah.
problem. So the physics is basically like they had this engine where it's like we could put these pieces together and attach everything with probably some kind of simple constraint system. Like, oh, this is attached to this, and like it can't go, unless this breaks, it can't, this constraint breaks, it can't move, right? But constraint systems like that are difficult without a fixed time step. Because of resolving the forces, and when you suddenly you have all this this crazy amount of like it's hard to even just balance it. There was no physics engine they could just take off the shelf that's just going to do this stuff correctly. They're like, they made their own physics, and back then it's like, well, how many forces can we resolve in whatever 1/20th of a second, which I gather is like the sweet spot for the physics system for this. What are we, and when you go higher, bad things happen because a force gets applied and suddenly it's a really much bigger force, because it's being iterated very quickly, uh,
Oh, it's compounding because there's so many frames going by that it's not
exactly.
intended to. It's compounding the
Correct. Compounding
force.
errors. Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And so you end up with like, it's like the tires are trying to keep up with the axles, trying to keep up with the,
Hmm.
I don't know, whatever, that all connects to, like the frame or whatever, and it's like, because they want it all to be able to blow apart, in individual pieces, they're all built together as a bunch of pieces. This is not a game where it's like one model and then it takes some damage and you take out, this part of the car, you make another model basically, right? You swap in another model and it's just one big piece that just works together, and you kind of animate the textures to make the wheels like they're moving. This is like, there are 4 tires, there is a chassis, there are probably some panels, there's an engine block, like, and all of these things are actually attached together in some way. And you're generating forces on the car that are coming from the tires on the ground, and the motive force of the engine, right? And of course the friction with the ground and all of those things. And then probably like whenever you're like off road in particular, it's like, well, we're probably gonna just like do some random kind of jiggling, and that's gonna be even worse, right? So you get off the road, it's
So
gonna be
it's
really
actually,
bad.
I mean, this simulation is a real description. It's really trying to do all
Yeah,
this stuff,
exactly. Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
that kind yeah. I mean,
And
so
and
basically they
the
took.
other well, the other part is that back then we also didn't often do, there's a couple things we didn't often do kind of in this era, which is we didn't often do um I mean, this game I think is working with it has a sense of how much time has elapsed for the frame. There are some games of the era that don't, like the first Dungeon Keeper. You play it on a faster machine, the game plays faster, because it just assumes that your time step is a 30th of a second. And so if your computer is 10 times faster than that machine, it's at 300th of a second, and the game's
Yeah,
unplayable. This game
yeah.
can't be doing that because with physics, you have to know how much time is going on to make the frame consistent. But one of the things that that came along a little bit after this was like you would do the physics kind of separately, in its own fixed time step of like the physics runs at this frame rate, and then we just match the rendering to fit the physics, so that all the pieces are in the right place. But the physics won't update as fast as the engine can render, maybe, or whatever, depending. In order to get the physics to be deterministic, it would be like we're gonna have a known fixed time step, and sometimes if your game was rendering slower, you'd have to run multiple physics steps for the frame, which of course would slow it down further, right? So you end up tanking your frame rate, and it would get worse and worse. So those are another couple kind of wrinkles around physics. Physics was not a very well solved problem in 1997 by any means. It wasn't really until Half-Life 2 that it kind of started to get nailed down. I mean, I'm sure there were other games
Mm.
before Half-Life 2, but that's 7 years later. There were limited physics, simulations and other things where you could limit it, like flight sims, for example. Yeah, you could pretty much simulate a plane because there's nothing else to worry about, and it's pretty much a hard, a single piece in a way, right? It generates lift, in this way, and if you move the
Right.
ailerons or whatever,
Oh, it's
it
in the
changes the
air
shape
too.
of that. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, it's not going
Yeah.
to connect with any other forces that it's going to have to resolve. So yeah, back in grad school, which I would have been in when this game came out, I was thinking about what a physics system looked like, in computers, and I was like, wow, that's really, because I had a physics undergrad. I was like, wow, that is a really daunting problem to consider.
Mm.
Anyway, and
Mm.
you have personally worked on a game that crashes if you run it on a modern machine because it's too fast in Infernal Machine. So
Yes, that was my doing. I
yeah,
was.
I'm going to blame Paul Lefevre for that, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, it's like looking. It's like, I mean, not to bring it back around to intend. I had intended to bring it back around to this, but we have a growing subtopic of this podcast thanks to the community and thanks to the charity event of preservation,
Mm.
right? And not, obviously the Video Game History, Foundation has a different or additional goal that they have for what they're doing, but just in terms of playing these games as they are intended to be played, that side of preservation is an interesting one for something like this, because it is kind of a time capsule, but also it's like you need to remember that. And your example about Infernal Machine is like, uh, yeah, it's like we don't think ahead. We're just trying to ship a game,
Yeah, yeah.
or whatever. So it's interesting, but so it's also, I didn't play MechWarrior 2, maybe a little bit at the time. It was big. They were huge games. They were very popular for PC players. Um, but I don't remember them having really many wheeled things. Is my
No, they were typically legged creatures.
leg. So that's my
Yeah,
point. Is like this game is taking that engine that was
yeah.
built for
Wheels are
mechs.
very hard.
Yeah, and they're basically taking this mech and turning it into a muscle car,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
and like smushing it down, and then trying to. So it's really,
I mean, you have 4 contact points, right? I mean, it's crazy. Like, it's crazy to even think about. Like, I would not have tackled this problem. We made a space flight game. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
you always can. That's the benefit of Star Wars. You
yep,
can
yep.
always fly through
You can
space.
always fly. Yep, yeah, yeah. Or you could just float above the ground, like in Racer, right? You don't have to actually touch the ground. Um,
Yeah, right.
so it's yeah, it was a tough problem at the time. And of course it has all the sort of, you want to damage these machines because it's a combat game. And like you mentioned Gran Turismo earlier, that, one of the nice things about setting this in an alternate universe is like, yeah, sure, it probably looks like a specific type, like a Mustang or something like that from the 70s, but it's not actually a Mustang that's licensed. So you can damage it if you want, which was another
Yeah,
thing. It's like, with a Gran Turismo type of game or Forza or whatever, there's no damage models for those cars because they license the cars, and the car manufacturers don't want to show them broken up. They want to see the pristine, gorgeous, check out our new rendering technology cars, that you see at the start of every generation with, like, on the Xboxes in particular. It's like, oh, check out the new Forza and how cool it looks, these cars. You never get to see them damaged, and I'm looking forward to like the damage model and how the cars kind of break up. I've seen a little
yeah,
bit of it in the training, but yeah.
yeah. Mine was smoking on the last mission. It's like, yeah. So I don't know.
Was it
It's
smoking or was it smoking?
yeah, it was smoking. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's yeah. The Gran Turismo example is an interesting kind of counterpoint to this same year. I think the car is called a Piranha, if I'm
Right, it's a
which I
Piranha.
think
Yeah,
they made. That's a
yeah,
made up thing, right?
that's a made up car. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um,
But
yeah,
it's a cool made up car.
it's a very cool car. Yeah, it's got a Mustang feel, but there's another car that it reminds me of.
Pontiac GTO, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of got a little bit of that shape to it, but yeah, what a fascinating game. Like I said, I knew that it would kind of be a connection point to various other things, like MechWarrior, obviously, but also just like this genre, because it was, this is the sim genre for PC, like MechWarrior, like Falcon, like the X-wing games, which are different, Wing Commander, different versions of it. it was all about like, how do you use your keyboard?
Yeah.
It's like,
how many keys can we put
how
on
many
this
keys,
thing?
it's like, so I did a lot of remapping for this one, and I know we're going to close down soon, but I did a lot of remapping for my modern brain because the default was not good.
Yeah, it was.
But still, and I'm not using a mouse or a controller. I'm trying it on keyboard, but I'm using both of my hands on my keyboard the whole time,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just, that is a sim. That's like what those were. It's like, we talked about it some with TIE Fighter, I think, right? Like, you're managing your speed and your,
Yeah, right.
your
And shifting the shields back and forth.
yeah, your energy, and that was a light one
Yeah,
compared to like MechWarrior. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, as action games, like I think of those sim games as like the manageable version for me is like, okay, it's turn based. Like, let me do all the things I want to do. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Now my turn is over, and that's the manageable version for me. So I'm kind of curious to see how this goes. I'm a little worried about the ability to finish it from that standpoint, but I am going to probably try to map the controller and see if I can put all the things I want on the controller. I don't know if it's actually going to support that. I was surprised to find that the game had native. I guess it would be direct input support of my Xbox 360. I could not believe my Xbox 360 wired controller. It just picked up. I was like, I mean, I guess
Yeah,
this was a
I'm
time
amazed.
where joysticks were common, and I know, of course, Microsoft has always tried to support. Yeah, certainly with these older wired controllers, like it supported the interface, like to query how many buttons does your controller have or whatever, which was the
Well,
whole
flight sticks,
thing.
that was a sim thing, right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
MechWarrior, I think, supported both, right? Where you could have both, just like Falcon, or we talked about it with probably X-Wing as well. But
Yeah,
in fact, I bought
I
we
bought a
both
flight stick
bought,
for that. Yeah,
we both bought a flight stick for that. I think I still have it.
I
Yeah.
have mine. So if I need to switch the
Man,
flight stick, I could do that to play
those are
this
the
game.
days, man. Those flight sticks with like 20 buttons on them.
Yeah, yeah, and the
Yeah.
hat,
And the hat.
under the
Yeah.
thumb. Yeah, so good. All right, well let's start winding down a little bit. We will return to this road. We have hardly talked about how the game actually plays, other than repeating car combat. So we'll get into that a lot more. In the future episodes, and talk about the Mech Sims genre in more detail. But I am loving it already for the vibe, so I look forward to more of it.
Have fun blowing up fireworks stands.
Oh, I will start. I mostly have shot cacti and trucks, drone trucks. I think they are drone jeeps, maybe. We didn't get a review this week or any email. We always, of course, love to have those either through the iTunes infrastructure. If you use something else, just let us know. If you have a moment, just go and give us a thumbs up on whatever those are. If you haven't had a chance to do that in the past. And of course, send email to devgameclub@gmail.com. We're on the web at devgameclub.com. And my buddy here twitches at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Now, I understand that Dark Souls is sort of what's on
Dark Souls
offer
2,
right? Dark Souls 2, right?
Yeah. Probably Dark Souls. I'm toying with going back to Minecraft, though, and doing a little bit of a tour there. I know Lost Lakes and Moors have both been continuing work, and I am still stuck in a cave, and I do wish to get out of that cave. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's that realm is still up, so enjoy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have not taken it down yet. At some point, I have to install Minecraft on another computer so I can consider what I'm going to do there. Anyway, we look forward to that. We also, as we have mentioned, have a fan-run Discord for the cast. There's a link in the show notes. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our merch store, all by Mark Garcia. Have fun making a Mode 4 rendezvous this week, and good night.
Good night.